What if the happiest song ever recorded was secretly a goodbye? A man alone in a fog-covered chalet, blocked for 2 weeks, no mountains, no music, until one morning changed everything. He wrote 14 songs in 14 days. The percussion in the final track came from a fire extinguisher, and the band members who appeared in the videos hadn't played a note on the record. This is the real story of Mr. Blue Sky, the song that made E.L.O. legends but ended the band they started. Birmingham, England, 1970. Two men with a radical idea set out to change what rock and roll was supposed to sound like. Roy Wood was the primary songwriter behind one of Britain's most inventive pop acts, but he had a vision that went further. He wanted to pick up where the Beatles had left off, combining the raw energy of a rock rhythm section with the formal beauty of a classical orchestra, not orchestral flourishes layered over rock songs. A genuine fusion, something that had never quite been done before. He found his partner in Lynne, the meticulous, soft-spoken songwriter who had been leading a moderately successful Midlands group. Lynne shared the dream completely. Together, they formed the Electric Light Orchestra, designed from the beginning as a true partnership. Two equal voices. A democratic collective where classical strings and electric guitars would meet as equals. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The debut single, released in 1972, announced their arrival with a sound nobody had heard before. Cellos and violins woven directly into a rock rhythm section. Not decorative, but essential. The music press took notice. For a brief electric moment, E.L.O. felt like exactly the radical new force Wood and Lynne had imagined building. But the partnership was already under threat. The band's manager was a calculating operator who ran his affairs with an iron fist and no particular interest in artistic integrity. He looked at Wood and Lynne and saw not a creative partnership, but an opportunity. Split them into 2 separate acts and collect 2 separate management commissions. By June of 1972, Roy Wood was gone, not because of a falling out with Lynne, not because of genuine creative differences, but because their manager had engineered the split for profit. Wood later confirmed it plainly. "I never had a real row with Jeff," he said years later. "We're still mates." But the democratic band they had dreamed of building together was already over before it had truly begun. Lynne stepped into the role of sole creative director without drama. He simply began doing what needed to be done. Throughout the mid-1970s, he produced, wrote, and arranged everything E.L.O. released. The string players remained in the lineup. Violinist Mick Kaminsky, cellists Hugh McDowell and Melvin Gale, bass player Kelly Grocott, keyboardist Richard Tandy, and drummer Bev Bavin. On stage, they looked like a genuine collective. But in the studio and in the creative process, the balance of power had shifted entirely. Lynne wrote the songs alone. Lynne produced the records alone. The layered studio textures that made E.L.O. distinctive all flowed from one mind at the controls. The audience didn't know this. To the people buying records and filling arenas, E.L.O. was a magnificent orchestral rock collective that had somehow captured the spirit of the Beatles and made it larger and more cinematic. Albums like El Dorado and Face the Music built the band's reputation into something enormous. By 1976, E.L.O. had become one of the biggest selling acts on the planet. The success was real and the music was extraordinary, but the structure underneath it had been quietly hollowing out for years. And by the spring of 1977, the man who had built all of it was exhausted, creatively blocked, and sitting alone in a chalet in the Swiss Alps with nothing but clouds. The pressure Lynne faced in the spring of 1977 was unlike anything he had dealt with before. A New World Record had sold millions of copies worldwide. The label wanted to follow up immediately, not just another album, but a double album, an event. Lynne retreated to a small chalet in the Swiss Alps to write. For 2 weeks, nothing came. The Alps were completely invisible. A thick, low-hanging fog covered everything. The chalet was cold and damp and silent. Lynne later described those first 2 weeks with rueful clarity. 14 days sitting with an instrument and a notebook, waiting for something to arrive and hearing nothing. The mountains surrounding him might as well not have existed. Every window showed the same gray wall. For a man who had spent 5 years producing some of the most architecturally complex pop music in the world, the silence was suffocating. And beneath the frustration was something deeper. The weight of having to be, once again, the only person responsible for everything. No collaborator, no democratic process. Just one man, an empty notebook, and a deadline that did not move. Then the weather broke. One morning, the fog lifted with the sudden, dramatic clarity that only happens in the mountains. And there, for the first time since Lynne had arrived, were the Alps. Massive and white and perfectly lit against a sky so blue it looked impossible. He later recalled the moment without embellishment. He wrote the opening lines of Mr. Blue Sky as a direct, almost involuntary response to what he was seeing. The sun came out, and the song came with it. Over the next 2 weeks, he wrote 13 more. The sessions that followed in Munich were unlike anything E.L.O. had done before. Lynne brought the 14 tracks to one of Europe's most technically advanced recording facilities. The engineer was Reinhold Mack, a brilliant, opinionated technician who pushed for a sharper, more compressed sound than E.L.O. had used on previous records. Their collaboration produced a sonic palette that was simultaneously warmer and more immediate than anything the band had previously released. Mr. Blue Sky arrived as the culmination of the album, the final statement on what Lynne titled the Concerto for a Rainy Day Suite. Designed as the emotional payoff of an entire vinyl side, it was the moment when everything the album had been building toward broke open into sunlight. Lynne assembled the track with obsessive attention to detail. The piano introduction drew from an unlikely source, a Kinks track from 1968, whose driving rhythm Lynne had long admired. The vocal harmonies were layered in a style that consciously echoed the most complex Beatles recordings, and the studio innovations went further than musical influence. To achieve the chorus percussion, Lynne and Mack struck a physical fire extinguisher with a metal rod and recorded the impact. That clanging metallic pulse came from safety equipment bolted to the studio wall. The vocoder effect threaded through the arrangement was inspired by a 1940s American children's audio series, processed until it sounded like something from the distant future. At the end of the vinyl side, Lynne embedded a private message in the vocoder, a phrase that sounded like a garbled version of the song's title, but actually said, "Please turn me over," an instruction to flip the record, a joke between the creator and whoever listened closely enough. When the double LP was finished, the elaborate gatefold artwork depicting a massive futuristic spaceship, the band knew they had made something that could not be topped. They were right, and that was part of the problem. Mr. Blue Sky was released as a single in January of 1978. It climbed to number 6 in the United Kingdom. In the United States, it reached number 35 on the charts, a figure that told only a fraction of the song's eventual American story. Over the following decades, it would be certified 3 times platinum, becoming E.L.O.'s best-selling single in the country. The music press responded with language that creates permanent reputations. Publications described the track as a guarantee of Lynne's legend as both songwriter and producer. Musicologists began parsing its construction, the way previous generations had parsed Lennon and McCartney, identifying structural echoes of "A Day in the Life" in the piano arrangement, the harmonic debt to "Yesterday" in the chord movement. Paul McCartney himself, years later, would tease Lynne about the borrowed elements with the kind of familiarity that only exists between people who understand each other's work completely. But the response that mattered most was happening inside the band. Mr. Blue Sky was so entirely the product of one man's vision that its success settled a question nobody had formally asked. It made unmistakably clear who E.L.O. was and who it belonged to. The string players, the rhythm section, the vocalists who had spent years on those stages. They had contributed. But the song the world heard as the definitive E.L.O. sound had been written alone in a mountain chalet and recorded through a process dictated entirely by Lynne's ear. The better Mr. Blue Sky performed, the more it reinforced a structure that was already pulling the band apart at its seams. The 1978 tour was the most ambitious production in E.L.O.'s history. The band performed inside a massive steel and fiberglass spaceship, a $500,000 structure featuring hydraulic lifts, banks of lasers, and heavy fog machines that transformed every arena into something resembling a science fiction novel. From the outside, it was the peak of everything E.L.O. had been building. Inside, it was a different story. The structure the band privately called the pizza oven was hot and poorly ventilated. Night after night, the heat warped the wooden bodies of the acoustic cellos and violins, pulling them out of tune mid-song. To compensate, the crew mixed in pre-recorded backing tapes, a fix that worked technically, but created a widening distance between the live performance and the music the audience believed they were hearing. In the studio, Lynne's frustration with classical musicians had reached a breaking point. In British recording sessions, union rules governed the working hours of orchestral players with rigid precision. They arrived on schedule, performed their parts, and left. Regardless of whether a take was finished, regardless of whether Lynne needed one more pass at a chord change. The moment the clock reached a certain hour, instruments were packed and sessions ended, mid-song if necessary. The engineer Mac had already suggested the solution. Abandon the strings entirely. The synthesizers arriving in the late 1970s could replicate orchestral textures without tuning problems or union rules. Lynne, watching his cellos go sharp under the stage lights, was ready to listen. The album Discovery, released in May of 1979, made the change official. After the release, E.L.O.'s music was made without the band's resident string players. Their textures, the warm, resonant blend of acoustic strings woven through rock rhythms, were replaced by synthesizer patches. Discovery performed well commercially. The single Don't Bring Me Down became E.L.O.'s biggest American chart hit. For a certain kind of thinking, this was the only data that mattered. But for the string players, the situation was close to surreal. Despite being excluded entirely from the recording process, Kaminsky, McDowell, and Gale were required to appear in all of the album's promotional music videos, standing on stage, instruments in hand, performing music that contained none of their actual playing. They had become visual props, symbols of a brand identity they no longer contributed to. The band the audience thought they were watching, the unified, classically trained rock collective, had quietly ceased to exist. What remained was a more efficient operation, centered entirely on one creative mind. In 1983, the tension that had been building for years finally broke into the open. Kelly Grocott, the bass player who had toured and recorded with the band since 1974, walked out and filed suit against Lynne and the band's management for unpaid royalties exceeding £300,000. But the most significant element of the action was not the money. It was the claim at its center. Grocott alleged that he had written a specific section of Mr. Blue Sky. The middle eight verse built around the line, "Hey you with the pretty face." That passage, he argued, was unmistakably different in character from the primary verse structures bearing Lynne's authorship. It had a lightness, a playful quality, a melodic logic that Grocott maintained was his contribution alone. Lynne's response was cold and precise. He described Grocott as a salaried employee who had been paid exactly what his contracts required, and suggested anyone confused about the terms of their employment consult their paperwork before engaging lawyers. The case settled out of court. Grocott received his £300,000. He was immediately and permanently dismissed. Lynne never spoke to him again. For fans who had grown up with the vocal chemistry between Lynne and Grocott, the interplay between their voices that gave E.L.O.'s performances so much warmth, the rupture was a loss most of them would never even know had happened. They simply noticed, gradually, and then all at once, that E.L.O. sounded different. That something essential was gone. Grocott later acknowledged the lawsuit had cost him more than money. The settlement confirmed his contributions were real, but the price of proving it had been too high. The 1980s arrived with a cultural shift that caught E.L.O. between worlds. The synthesizer-heavy sound that had replaced their orchestral identity now found itself competing with sharper new wave textures and the sleek productions of synth-pop. E.L.O. had made the transition from strings to synthesizers just in time to find that synthesizers alone were no longer a distinguishing feature. The albums that followed Discovery showed diminishing returns. Lynne, increasingly withdrawn from the demands of maintaining a band structure, treated E.L.O.'s later records as personal studio exercises. The remaining members understood their roles with perfect clarity. In 1986, Lynne dissolved E.L.O. entirely. He retreated into production work, collaborating with some of the most celebrated musicians of his generation. His contributions to a celebrated rock supergroup, his production of landmark records for fellow legends, all of it burnished his reputation enormously. It also confirmed what the inside of E.L.O. had known for years. The band had always been, in the most essential sense, a solo project with extra musicians. What followed was something even devoted fans found difficult to watch. Drummer Bev Bevan, who held a partial share of the band's trademark, formed his own touring group to perform E.L.O.'s catalog. Lynne responded with legal action. He pursued Bevan through the courts, purchased the remaining trademark rights, and then turned his lawyers toward every spin-off organization that attempted to perform the music under any variation of the E.L.O. name. Former bandmates who had spent years on those stages, who had given their best years to that music, found themselves on the wrong side of a legal wall built by the person they had trusted most. By the time Mr. Blue Sky crossed millions of streams, the song's second life had fully arrived. Its placement in a celebrated Hollywood blockbuster in 2017 introduced it to a generation with no memory of vinyl gatefolds or spaceship stage sets. They heard the song in a movie theater and felt something they could not quite name, that specific, irreducible joy that only a handful of pieces of music in the entire history of recorded sound had ever reliably produced. Jeff Lynne re-recorded the track in 2012, working entirely alone. He produced it himself, played the instruments himself, sang all the parts himself. It was released under the E.L.O. name. None of the original players were involved. The re-recording was, in a sense, the most honest version of the story E.L.O. had ever told. By 2012, Jeff Lynne's E.L.O. was not a branding decision. It was accurate. The journey from a two-man democratic partnership to a solo project that retained a band's name had taken a decade and a half. A spaceship that overheated, a lawyer's letter, 100,000 miles of touring that separated the music from the people who had made it together. When E.L.O. was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017, Roy Wood thanked Lynne with characteristic warmth, acknowledging that without Lynne's dedication to the songwriting, the invitation would never have come. Wood was right. The songs were extraordinary. Mr. Blue Sky was everything Lynne had spent his career trying to create. The paradox that defined E.L.O.'s story was this. In achieving the perfect version of what he had set out to do, Lynne completed a transformation that left the original idea behind. The democratic collective that Wood and Lynne had imagined in Birmingham in 1970 became the vehicle for one man's singular genius, and that genius produced one of the most beloved songs in the history of popular music. But somewhere in the Alps, writing 14 songs in 14 days, the last traces of what E.L.O. had originally been were disappearing. Not because the music was bad, because it was perfect. E.L.O. proved that one man's vision could reach perfection, and that perfection had a price. Mr. Blue Sky still brought joy to everyone who heard it. That never changed. But the story behind it was the story of a dream that succeeded so completely it consumed everything around it. The men who stood inside that spaceship, who gave their best years to that music, deserved more than a legal brief. What's your memory of E.L.O.? Drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's greatest era.